for September 24th, 2020. We have a number of guests to discuss one of the issues on the agenda, so we're going to start out with that, and then we'll loop back to announcements and the other issues on the agenda. So that issue is number 33416 in the node repo, CGS exports detection for modules with ES module export. And Miles, I think you were going to start off by giving us the framing, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so we released modules with the latest implementation in Node 12. It's now unflagged in both 12 and 14. We got a lot of feedback from the community for a number of different aspects of the implementation. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that definitely frustrated people was that our implementation does not support named exports from common JS modules. As a team, we worked on a number of different potential solutions for this, including going to the standards org TC39 to try to make changes to the spec that would allow it. But up until now, there hasn't been really a clear and spec compliant way to offer this. And the spec compliance is one of the most important bits here. You can't, because CommonJS is dynamic, you, in theory, if you wanted to get a perfect snapshot of the exports, would need to execute that whole module in its whole graph to capture its exports, which would cause out of order execution. And at the very least, while there are some people who like that approach, we could not build consensus around that as an approach. And there's a couple of different approaches that have been suggested, none of which we've been able to land on. More recently, in the last couple months, Guy Bedford, Jeffrey Bruth, and a few other folks have been exploring using static code analysis. So parsing the module from that parse, being able to do some heuristics, and from those heuristics determining the exports of the module, and essentially allowing exports that can be heuristically determined on the module. It is important that we're able to verify that, because the spec expects exports that do not exist to fail early prior to the execution of the module itself. That's one of the bits in the spec that we've been trying to, remain adherent to. So Guy has this pull request that uses, well, Guy can get more into the specifics, but we have gotten very close, but have not totally gotten consensus on landing this change with an additional heuristic that it would only attempt to predict exports on modules that include an __ ES module export. The __ ES module export is a special export that is used primarily from transpilation tools. So Babel or Webpack or Rollup will amend this. And a number of tools that build like UMD modules will include that __ ES module as a way to signal the fact that this was transpiled and can be loaded that way. I can maybe hand it off to Jeff and Guy now to get more into the specifics, but we're getting, I believe, like mid-90s accuracy in the expected exports with that constraint. That would limit which modules this feature would support, but it would still be better than the status quo. I believe that if we turn this on for all modules, the accuracy is something in the 70% range. But this may be a good time maybe to stop and answer some quick questions if anyone from the TSC has any, and then hand it off to Jeff and Guy to dig a little bit more into the implementation and explain the numbers and choices that we have. So does anyone have any questions right now?
I have one, which is, the numbers 90 and 70%. What's the impact when it gets it wrong?
When it gets it wrong, it means you would try to do a named import and it would fail early, saying that import is not available. And I believe that the concern from objectors to this pull request is that unless it has like high 90s accuracy, it would be very confusing if some modules worked and some modules didn't work. And there wasn't like a clear way to understand like why certain modules worked and certain modules didn't.
It's worth noting on that point that I believe, Miles, maybe you can clarify this as well. The error message when a user hits that failure scenario will give them the correct action to do the default import and then read the name of that. So there is a very quick fix if the user hits that case, which we can make sure is prompted in the error message, so that like immediately recoverable.
That is true if the import statement is one line, but there was a bug recently found for multi-line import statements where like the improved error message that we were doing doesn't work, but that's a work item that we can follow up on.
Yeah,
it's
we
just
can fix
improving
that.
the regular
I think
expression.
someone already posted a fix for that, Miles.
The fix that they posted was was no longer doing the nice error message. And there's a to-do item there to make it support multiple lines.
If there are no more questions, I could just give a bit more background if that would be useful.
I had one more question. Just that my only other question was, is this something that can be done externally, or does it have to be integrated?
So because it comes down to the, sorry, Miles, you can go as well on that one if you prefer.
It has to be integrated. There's no way, this is like a platform feature. Like in theory, with custom loaders, someone could potentially allow this behavior specifically at an application level. But unless this was deeply integrated into Node, it is not something that module authors or community members could expect when they're publishing modules.
Right. So you couldn't create a module which would do this extra scanning and, I don't know, have a different require or something. Like none of that's workable is what I was assuming. Just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, the import stuff is deeply integrated into V8. A bunch of the machinery is handled by V8 itself. And so like we'd be modifying the module record that we're handing between these things, but there would be no way. This is a platform specific feature.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Guy. That's it for now.
Yeah, so as Miles said, this has been a very long process for the modules group trying to work through this. And it's very clear that the expectation that users have is that these things work. And so it's a surprise to everyone when it doesn't work. And they're getting this error today that they try and import something, it doesn't work, and then they have to be told to import the default. Now, then that's not necessarily going to work with their current TypeScript workflow, or it's not necessarily going to work with their current browser workflow. So it's creating a friction, and it's causing friction with other tools. So Node doing things differently is, yeah, it's detrimental to Node and it's detrimental to the ecosystem. So at the same time, Gus is quite right to block it on accuracy because it's heuristical. It's a very fast lexer that I wrote for a separate reason. So it's not actually a full parser. It doesn't construct objects. It's just a simple lexer. But it'll basically run through and check your exports assignments and be able to statically see what looks for. And it's pretty accurate considering it's doing no computation of the actual source. But at the same time, it's somewhat of a hack, and but it fills into a scenario where users would otherwise not be able to get anything, and so it's sort of like a patch to just make the ecosystem better. And the difficulty we have is that Gus was wanting high accuracy, which is a very difficult thing to get in this. And that's why we added this ES module flag restriction, because modules that have ES module are typically modules that come from Babel or TypeScript, where they have a very predictable source output. And so we can get very high accuracy in the exports detection. But then it just became clear that we were catering this whole PR to Gus, when in fact this is about the ecosystem as a whole, and it's about what is best for Node and the JS ecosystem. And my personal opinion at this point is that this restriction to just ES modules is, which Gus has since removed his block on, is too restrictive to be useful because it will only apply in maybe 5 to 10% of cases, whereas users want this on most modules. And so there's another PR which applies this to all CommonJS modules, even without the ES module export. And that I think would be the most widely useful to the system. And that's one that Gus will very clearly continue to block on. So in a sense, it's that one that I would be looking to get the block basically overruled. But we do have to move relatively quickly because, as Miles says, we would like to see this land on node 12. If we don't land on node 12, there's a risk of people publishing packages that assume they can import names, and then their users try it on 12 and they don't get that functionality. So people, you know, we kind of get stuck in a place where we can't do this stuff. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't land. I think it's just, it would be a huge boon to the ecosystem to be able to make a decision to do something that just helps. But yeah, so that's my feeling on this stuff.
So, I disagree with the assertion that AS modules, the underline AS modules approach gives higher accuracy, because from a user perspective, if the module is transpiled or not, it doesn't care. Like if I'm a user, I'm using AS modules, I don't care if my module is transpiled or not, if my dependency is transpiled or not. And in practice, limiting this approach to ES modules gives lower accuracy from that perspective, which is a worse experience for users. So personally, I think even with the accuracy of 70%, it's probably good enough for us. And we should move with that approach instead of the one that limits for transpiled modules, as this will be a better it will be a better experience for users. And I think we can improve that number in the future, if I understand correctly, by improving the Lexer analysis.
Yes, there is still room for improvement. A lot of work has already gone into it.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
So just one more question, like so there's no other detriment that's been brought up other than the potential confusion over, well, why does it work sometimes and why does it not work other times?
The only other consideration here would be performance. So running a pass, how much does that slow down module loading? And so there's a few things that are done there, which I can go into in a little bit more detail. The short of it is it's typically under a millisecond or a millisecond per module, and it's only when you import from the ES module system. So it doesn't affect your current, if you're just using CommonJS and no ES modules, there's no effect. If you're just using ES module, there's no effect. It's only when you on the lines between your CommonJS and your ES modules when you import a CommonJS.
I have
And
a question there.
Sure, go ahead.
If someone only does a default export from the CommonJS module and doesn't do the named exports, I'm assuming it doesn't go through this pipeline, correct?
Do you mean when they import it, or
yeah, if they just import the default and don't do named imports?
For every import of a CommonJS module, it does the pass because it has set the full static module in the registry.
So I guess a question, and maybe you can correct me if my intuition is wrong. If someone's just importing the default, doesn't that just equate to the module that exports? And in that case, we don't need to do the parse. The reason why I'm saying that is, like, that at least could help with that performance problem, because in theory, if someone was concerned about performance, they could just import the default destructure afterwards and then not have to worry about that performance hit.
To be clear, there isn't a performance hit. That's why it's not a full parser. It's Alexa that runs incredibly fast over the source code and does like barely any allocations. So we're like, it can pass a megabyte in, sorry, I'm just looking up the numbers here. The parser it comes from can pass 3 megabytes in 24 milliseconds. So it's really completely unnoticeable, and it's been tested against every package on npm already. It's got no issues. So but if we were to do something like that, that's effectively almost going back to like what dynamic modules was about, which was like only put together what you're importing, and we saw what happened to that at TC39.
I just wanted to clarify. So it basically should not affect CommonJS code at all. And it would only affect cases that would have failed. Like, so, you know, forgetting the discussion whether it actually has a performance overhead or not, if you tried to do the import in the case where it potentially could, you wouldn't have been able to do the import anyway. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's additive, it's backwards compatible, and we can potentially continue to improve it over time.
And we can also work on improving the error cases so that there's better messages to let people know like what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how it could be fixed in their code. I guess a question for Guy and Jeff that I hadn't thought about before. Would there be a way to write a tool that could validate expected exports for packages, so that for module authors who are publishing CommonJS modules, they could essentially, like, we could give them a tool to make it really easy to validate that what they are expecting would be happening, so that, hey, if someone opens a PR saying, hey, your project is not working, they could fix that.
Sounds like a nice idea. I mean, it would be kind of cool in your npm see what you're exporting and things like that. I don't know, maybe there's some interesting discussions to be had there with npm.
I mean, that would just be basically Node itself. Like Node itself tries to import the module, and you see what names are available. That's similar to that's basically the test suite that I wrote that generated all the numbers with the percentages. That is such a tool. I think like we would, rather than encouraging people to like game our detection algorithm so that their CommonJS module is successful, I think we'd probably prefer to push people in the direction of creating an ESM wrapper so that, they're not relying on this detection algorithm, but it's like just they're truly explicitly defining their ESM exports, and it's kind of, done in the standard compliant way, et cetera. But yeah, we could do it either way.
It kind of makes sense to me. Like if somebody's willing to invest some time to fix it, it would be nice to fix it in a way that, like, longer term, this isn't even an issue, right?
Yeah, and we have idiomatic patterns already to do that. So I guess like the cases that we're talking about improving here are like stagnant modules that people are not going to update. So at
Right.
least it's a slightly better experience for folks who want to be using ESM.
Yeah, I think as far as documentation and what we encourage as a project, I think we'd want to encourage the ESM wrapper, and Anna created a tool to create one of those automatically. So I think we'd probably push people in that direction, because then that's standard compliant and will work with all bundlers, all tools, browsers, et cetera. Whereas, other environments aren't going to implement guys like detection algorithm. That's going to be a node specific thing.
In terms of risk, I mean, one comment before is we've seen a few of the ES6 modules changes cause breakage in 12 and have to respin and stuff. What's the take on the risk of this change in terms of that?
Yeah, I guess like adding to that question as well, like Guy, with what you were saying about how like importing the default would still have to go through this pipeline. Does that mean that this pipeline is creating that default object now? Is there any possibility that like importing the default from a module will have different outcomes now than they would have prior to this Lexer being introduced?
Yeah, that's an important consideration. And so far in all our discussions, that has been a semantic that has been maintained and is maintained in the current PR. So there are no plans at the moment to change that. But yeah, so that was out of seeking backwards compatibility and the sort of well-defined semantic. There are some obscure interrupt cases where you might want that default to be something else, which can be discussed further, but I think that's probably out of scope for this meeting. In terms of backwards compatibility, there's another thing that happens, which is all of the exports their accesses are triggered. If there are any errors thrown, so because we're exporting everything, as soon as you import that CommonJS module, we're triggering the exports accesses. And some of those could cause side effects or throw. But I really can't see that. Basically, it's fully backwards compatible. Like worst case scenario, it accesses an export that has a warning that'll throw, but then it'll get caught and you'll never see the error. And that's it. And it's only when the user explicitly imports this CommonJS module from the ES module system, so it doesn't affect non-ES module workflows at all.
So,
So is it fair to
something that
say, sorry, just fair to say you believe the risk is low overall?
Yeah, there is minimal risk. It's safe to backport. The main thing is like, I think it's just because it feels ugly, because it's like, it's this kind of heuristic, and that's the biggest thing that I think Gus is complaining about. No one's complaining about compat or semantics. They're complaining about the fact that it's this weird heuristic and
inaccuracy.
Yeah. And I think just getting over that in the name of compatibility is kind of the reason we're coming to the TSC here, to request permission to be able to overrule Gus on this and say, actually, this is in the better interests of the ecosystem, to just do something that will make things work. And I mean, this is JavaScript after all. So.
Wait a bit. If this is about that this looks ugly or something like that, then what are the consequences of that? Like we have basically, if we limit the options to paths, one we don't do this, and the second one is we do this. What are the consequences of each of those actions? And I think that we should decide purely on the consequences. And if there is an objection of some sort, like this heuristic or something like that, can we reward that into something that is closer to the consequences of the decision?
I think the biggest consequences from a user perspective, a user will just be like, I don't know if I'm going to get a named exports or not. And it won't be clear to them. It's always a bit of a gamble, like, will it be there? Oh, it's not, I've got to use the default. But when it comes down to it, that is the major experience for all users today in the JS ecosystem. And that was not because of Node, that's because of the overall situation we're in due to this sort of problem of the commons that we have with named exports. So yeah, like the worst aspect is a user just not knowing what they're going to get. But the point is, it's correctable. There aren't ramifications of it. Yeah, it's it's smoothing over a problem that by
I,
making it better, basically.
Thank you.
I'd love to add one thing to that as well, is like, I think that there's some differing opinions about how developers work and the appropriate way to do things. But I think that there is a common pattern that is, you know, you npm install something, you look at an example, and then you write it and you try to use it. And a lot of that is driven by the docs, but some people don't even look at the docs. They may look at other examples of the code or just try to use it. So I think that like one of the things here is definitely like if someone's npm installing something and they know like they're installing Lodash or installing some module and they know more or less like the API off the top of their head and know the methods, like the argument is that they should be able to just do it. As of today, like they do need to go and then look at the documentation and see whether or not it supports ESM, whether or not it's common.js. And so I could see one argument, which is like, you know, you should look at the documentation of the things that you're using. But the reality is that developers don't always look at the documentation. Developers who have been working in tools such as TypeScript or Babel that do this for them have been just doing this for a long time. And it is a negative experience for them when they go and use our implementation and it doesn't work. And I would echo kind of Guy's sentiment there, that this is just improving that. And the fail case here is the status quo as opposed. And so, you know, I think the major contention here was whether or not improving the status quo, but only moving the needle a certain amount, actually made the fail case more confusing, or if just having a clear, like from an educational standpoint, and this is something I can also empathize with, if I'm teaching a student about JavaScript and I teach them about common.js and I teach them about ESM, and it's like, if you import a common.js module, there's no named imports. Like that's a really easy concept to teach. Whereas, well, you can try to import a common.js module. It might have named imports. It may not. It's based on a heuristic. If it doesn't work, you'll get an error and follow the error. Is not really like clean from an educational standpoint or from a like developer experience. So this kind of the optimization that we're talking about making here is absolutely one that caters to both legacy and to like experienced developers. So I could see an argument here where like we could say, you know, we should optimize for something that makes it easier to teach people how to use Node, even if it upsets or annoys the developers that are using it, because it removes magic and removes complexity that people tomorrow would have to learn. And I think a lot of that maybe boils down to how bullish we are on our legacy common.js system getting updated over time. And Mary can maybe
I think
it
Anatoly
looks like
has
she
had his
has a,
hand up for a bit.
okay, I'm so sorry, I didn't see that. I'll stop.
Nope, all good. Keep going. I'll don't have anything to add to the current conversation, so once this gets wrapped up, I'll speak.
I think that that's it for me. I just wanted to make sure that like kind of more than one side of this was expressed, and some of the like concerns that are a little bit more esoteric, especially the education bit. I have to be honest, I have flip-flopped on whether or not I'm okay with this, and have probably been on the like, you know, like plus minus zero, like kind of like one-ish camp, because I think what we have right now in ESM is very usable. This makes it more usable, but like does add complexity and magic to the implementation. But we have been adding some other magic too for usability for similar purposes. So I would say like, considering some of the other things that we've added recently, including the like WildStar import stuff for packages.
It's worth noting as well that this is the same magic that our bundlers do when we use named exports as well. So like at some level, it's like a similar kind of process to, you know, what Rollup is doing in detecting the named exports. So we're following a lead that was given to us and that we had no choice on because we weren't engaged at an earlier time, basically. Yeah, sorry, Miles, I'll let you get back.
That's all good. I feel like I've talked enough. Anatoly, if you want to go for it, please do.
Yeah, my only other hesitation is that given that, and I'm generally leaning towards this making sense, but I think given that this is Elixir and it's using some heuristics, there was the idea brought up that we could improve this in the future, but I think any improvements would have to be backwards compatible, right? So you could never release anything that now suddenly doesn't understand one of the modules or a couple of the modules that it did before. So just something that is like, in terms of Semver compatibility would have to be kind of taken into account and would add some overhead, I guess, in terms of like do we have documentation around everything that this can handle right now and how it's going to be affected in the future, right? Or like test cases or whatever.
Moving forward, if we wanted to get this on 12, what are the realistic steps for us working on modules to be able to try and meet that goal? Is it possible, or is it not possible at this point? Because that would save a lot of time and energy if we know where we are in that as well.
So I guess speaking to that, the release team had a meeting today. I unfortunately wasn't able to meet it, but I did see the notes. I think Beth was in the meeting. Can maybe speak to what they were saying regarding 12?
Yeah, so we have a Semver minor due out in a couple of weeks. We're not going to hold off on that one for the modules updates. There is another Semver minor due at the end of October, so we might be able to make that if these changes were to land soonish. We would still like to keep the 2 weeks baking time in 14, but we're happy to do an interim kind of 14 release whenever they land to get them out as soon as possible to try and mitigate against that.
So I guess one thing I'd just say is end of October is only a couple weeks away, which would be like my one concern with that from a timing perspective. I think that I think there's an urgency here to a certain extent that if we did want to land this, we really should be considering doing it as soon as possible and getting it out in a release, potentially even as soon as next week. To marry what's saying as an immediate vote, I partially agree. I think that if the TSC has consensus, then we don't need a vote. But I would love, I just finished today going through and backporting all of the other changes for modules that were not yet on 14. So the 14.x staging is up to date. And I'm on vacation next Tuesday, but I will volunteer to get a 14.x release out that includes this if we can reach an agreement on landing it. Unless someone else wants to volunteer to do that release, but like I'm willing to help try to get it out. So if we're okay with saying we want to land this and we want to move forward with it, I think, you know, we've been trying for a very long time to build consensus and been unsuccessful. So if we can get quick consensus on the TSC, I think that
So just to be clear, there's no. I saw Gus cleared their objection to the pull request.
That's only for the __ ES module.
Right, and then for the other one, there's but then for other things, there is an objection. Do we need a vote? Is what I'm getting at, or is
I think if we got approval, I think Gus would probably reinstate his rejection. I know maybe he won't make it explicitly, but I know he is in objection to that PR, effectively. But yeah, there could be some way around.
Okay. What we could do today,
we should be prepared to vote if we're not going to have a vote immediately. If we're going to go consensus route first, we should certainly be prepared to vote.
What we could do today, if people are up for it, is the __ ES module version of it does not have any objections. We could land that today and put the intention to land the other one. We could explicitly ping Gus and see if he will block it. And if Gus says that he would block it, then we can follow up with the TSC and try to get a vote going out today that closes maybe like Monday. That way we can.
I might just add, I would prefer if we could pick one or the other and go with it, if that's possible. Just because I have to do a full day of work to get the PR merged because it's still in WebAssembly and we can't land WebAssembly in core because of other restrictions. So I have to convert the code into JavaScript. So I won't be able to do that work I mean,
What I'm tempted to do is to, like, either call for the vote now or open an issue saying, this is the recommendation. The nobody
Wait,
objected in
call
the
for a vote
TSC
on which
meeting.
one?
Well, basically, I think we would need to say, here are the two PRs, and it's basically that we the TSC believes that both of these should land. Just, or whatever we get consensus here, and say that, from the people in the meeting, this is what we think is this is what the TSC consensus seemed to be. Other TSC members who weren't there, please, you have 2 days, whatever number of time we say, to object or have more discussion. And if there is any objections, then we could immediately open the vote.
We don't have quorum to make any decisions in this meeting.
But we can make a recommendation, right? Like, the idea is to say in the issue, this is the suggestion of what happens, and give the rest of the TSC the chance to object or confirm that we actually have consensus.
Since time is of the essence, can we try to be more decisive and move more quickly than that?
Yeah, I think we should just go with the immediate vote, and between three options, either the yes underscore yes module option, or the option that works on more modules, or not landing on any of these PRs. So it would be a
I'm good with that.
between three options. Okay.
Does anybody have any objections to that?
I'm okay with that. Do we want to do ranked choice again? I feel like that would work very well. That's what you did for the last one, right, Mary?
Yes, we can do ranked choice or just single vote. I'm good with. Yeah, I'm good with any options.
I feel good about ranked choice, specifically because folks may like one or of the two implementations, but not the no. And so it'd be good to get a pulse of like where we're at between those two.
Okay, I'm gonna prepare a OPA vote vote then.
And if there's an explicit abstain option, that would be great, because then people who aren't going to vote can make that indication early, and then we don't have to worry about them.
Yeah, I can make it more clear in this vote that abstain is just voting without selecting any options. It was an option on the unhandled rejection.
Super.
Yeah, and maybe in that, just include a link to the recording to say, like, between 0 and 45, if you want to listen to the existing discussion in addition to the minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know how much context is needed to make an informed decision. I mean, it would be really nice to get something that can, I think the risk with the ES module one is, as Mary said earlier in the chat, that you get a low percentage, and now it's like only 1 in 20 of packages will get exports, even though you're getting 90% of those working. So, now that sort of that gamble of will I get a named export goes down to like 1 in 20 from a user perspective. And I'm still a little bit concerned about that. So I'd be wary of putting a vote that sort of gives a choice. And like, I feel like there are a lot of like other factors as well. So it's like, if we could just get from the TSC either like an ability to say, the modules, I don't know. It's just we need to get over Gus's block, and I'm concerned about the TSC taking ownership for the decision as a whole, if that makes sense. Sorry, I don't mean to muddy the waters even more.
Right. It could. Okay. So you're suggesting the vote just be override the objection to one of the PRs.
Right. So say that we think this is a useful feature, and that we can override Gus's PR in the name of where the existing modules group consensus is. So saying deferral to the modules group, and willing to override individual blocks based on the fact that it's not a modules group majority.
But I'm a little uncomfortable being asked to vote down a hypothetical objection
Right.
that hasn't been made yet. Like, I know that it's exactly what we don't what you probably don't want to hear in this situation, but you know, different objections require different votes because people are going to be objecting for different reasons, and some objections are more valid than others.
I'm specifically referring to Gus's objection based on the accuracy.
So,
Okay.
so I would like to just like augment what Guy suggested a little bit. The modules working group is not a chartered working group. It does not have ownership over this decision, although we have given them kind of like a by proxy authority over modules. The eventual blocks, once a PR is opened, like the modules group has said that like we'll respect blocks and try to reach consensus, but like the reality is that this is a Node.js collaborator and a Node.js PR. This is a collaborator thing that we're dealing with here. So I would prefer that we don't make this about the modules team consensus. I'm looking
I wasn't
right
talking
now
about
to
modules team
see.
consensus.
Yeah.
I don't think that was
Oh,
on.
Guy was.
Oh, I see. Okay, I'm getting it's all coming together for me. Thank you.
Right. So your suggestion, Miles, as well. Is
So
that
if we look
the
at the
vote
actual
be,
PRs,
yeah,
there's 2 PRs right now, and that Gus has not objected to either. The exports for all modules one has been open for 7 days and has been approved by Mary. Gus has said in there those numbers are not looking too good, but it has not explicitly blocked it. So I think what we need to do right now, the order of operations to kind of follow what you were saying, Rich, would be TSC members should approve that PR that want to see it land. I can ping Gus and let him know that after this conversation, you know, folks are feeling like moving forward with this and that he would like to block it. Now is the time to do it, basically. And if that block comes in, then we can call a vote to override that specific block. And especially since we haven't had quorum in this call today, we can't predict what the outcome of such a vote would be. And Gus is not blocking the underscore ES module iteration. He's dropped his block for that. But with that being said, Guy, it is sounding like even from you, you're kind of feeling at this point that like we'd almost be better off not doing it. I don't know that I totally agree with that because I think that the underscore ES module iteration unlocks a use case for UMD. So I personally like a perfect solution here that I would love to see, Guy, would be that underscore ES module one get fixed up and just get landed as soon as possible. And then the thing that you pivot on for checking for underscore ES module, just open a follow-up PR to remove that. And essentially like have that
Let's continue that discussion, and I think that's a discussion for us to work through in terms of the details of it.
but we have the 2 PRs that have the things that they're trying to do.
right. I
Well,
think
those PRs can't land right now. I need to do another day of work on them, both of them. If you look, the tests are failing.
Yeah.
so. I think Rich's point is we are almost out of time. So it sounds like you know the modules team can figure out what they want, and then if a vote's needed, let the TSC know. Is that the?
Yeah, I'll ping Gus right now and let him know that we're planning to move forward on this. In lieu, Mary just objected to underscore ES modules. That we're planning to move forward with this in lieu of an objection. So if he doesn't want to see this land, you know, he needs to voice that.
And if he does object, assistance coming, swift vote to overrule in that case would be incredibly welcome because yeah, time is of the essence.
Yeah, I would encourage any TSC members who want to see that thing land to make sure they go and approve it because just psychologically, it's very easy to vote yes on overriding a single objector when there's 8 people approving. Even if you don't fully understand the issues, which a lot of people in the TSC won't. So just putting that out there. Please approve it if you want it.
Okay, so we do have some private business. We have a few other issues on the agenda, which we won't be able to get time to get to all of them. So I'd suggest we identify which ones are maybe one other one we try and address. There is the change requirements for object dismissal. That one, Mary, I think the only remaining question was whether you think we should, we're okay with pasting into the issue our recommendation, or we
Mary
need
removed it
to
from the
agree.
agenda.
Sorry, what?
Mary removed that one from the agenda already, I think. Is that right, Mary?
Yes.
Yeah, that one's
Okay.
already removed from the agenda.
Okay, good. So if that one's already removed, we can move on. Are there any others in terms of the, drop minimum waiting time is a hard guideline? That was the one I was actually thinking of. Is that the one that the objection was dropped for? Or sorry, was removed from the?
No, that's still
No.
on the agenda. I'm gonna comment on the pull request with what we decided, and I can help with auditing the teams that are code owners.
Okay,
I
great.
propose that at this point, with it being this late and with us having private business to talk about, I would say move everything to next week, except for if anyone sees anything on the agenda that needs to be addressed sooner, take it to email. We can do announcements in the next TSC
Sure.
meeting or whatever. But just take it to email and let's wrap this up. As I propose.
I will just give anybody the opportunity to say that something that's left we really should talk about. Otherwise, we'll do that.
I object to pulling out in the GitHub. I think that could be moved to GitHub entirely and not the next week even.
Okay, so let's close out for today in the public system. I'll stop the stream. Thanks you for everybody who's come and participated, and for those